We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. It's Wednesday, May 27th, 2026. Welcome to it, guys. Today, we're going to talk about how the vibe session is over and the permacession is here. The United States is helping foreign workers take Americans' jobs. Government overpaid welfare beneficiaries by a whole butt ton of money. A family is struggling to survive in New York City on $200,000 a year, and we are redefining material support to terrorism. So let's get after it. I want to do a mental exercise to start out with today. Things are always a matter of perspective. Now, I remember having a conversation back in the old days when I still had a job that required something other than a non-restrictive waistband and a camera lens about 3.5, 4 feet from my face. And that was when I worked for the FBI. And I was having a conversation with an agent who had just come into some money and he was trying to decide of what to do with it. Now, look, I'm a money guy. I'm a finance guy. I'm a numbers guy. I like to sort of pay attention and analyze things and sort of invert the way that you think about things in order to get to the answer that I want to get to. And that is what is going to be the best outcome possible. Now, what this agent was proffering before me was he wanted to take the money that he had suddenly inherited, completely unexpected, and buy the plot of land that was next to his house. He said, look, I'm going to expand out my yard. It's going to be great. I have a young son. He'll get to run around. I could basically build my own football field for him. It'll be awesome. And I said, well, do you owe money on your house? Yeah, I have a mortgage. I said, well, let's think about this through the way you were thinking about it. And then let's think about it the inverted way and see if that's actually the best way to go about using this money. See, from your perspective, you owe money on a house. You're going to take this newfound money and purchase the plot of land next to you and just have a bigger yard. Now, let me present the exact same circumstances on your balance sheet where you would have an asset in the form of the house and the yard, and a liability in the form of the money you owe to the bank. Let's say in this alternative universe that you just paid off your house, okay? And you, at the same time, wanted to acquire this yard. Gotcha. All right. Would you, if you had a paid off house, borrow money on that house in order to buy the yard next door? And he said, well, no. If my house was paid off, why would I put up my house to the bank as collateral in order to acquire a plot of grass? I said, yeah, you're right, because you've inverted the way you're thinking about it. But if you look at the end of the balance sheet, you would in effect be in the exact same position. In situation one, you have a house and this new expanded yard, and you owe money to the bank. In situation two, where you had the house owned free and clear, you then went back to the bank and borrowed more money to get the yard. So in effect, you have the house and the expanded yard, and you owe money to the bank. And he said, I guess it's a matter of perspective. I hadn't really thought of it that way. Yeah, maybe it's not the best decision to go ahead and do that. I think I'll just pay off my house. And I said, no man can serve two masters. It's probably a really good idea to pay off debt. If you can't tell, guys, I really hate debt. It's been the one really silver lining in the adventures, the trials and tribulations of being an indefinitely suspended and then twice fired FBI agent. You're able to actually take a little bit more risks and step to a bunch of government officials that say, hey, you sure you want to do the right thing? You got a pretty sweet gig here. And you go, yeah, 3-1, I'm debt free. I don't owe anybody anything. I'm going to do the right thing because it's the right thing. And you just can't hold this job over my head. So all of that to say, it's a matter of perspective. Now, with that vein of thought, I want to do another mental exercise before we get to the news stories of the day. And we're looking at them through a different lens because, for whatever reason, this just popped up in my train of thought when all things inflation are above on the news and everybody's talking about the cost of living. And I remembered something that was in history, but not too long ago, actually, is something that we all lived through, but you might not remember it because it might not be top of mind because it didn't happen in America. So, the first story I actually want to cover down on comes from 2013. This one I happened to find out of Reuters. The headline is The Cyprus Central Bank Announces 47.5% haircut on large Bank of Cyprus deposits. What the heck are you talking about, Steve? Now, if you don't remember, in 2013, there's the tiny island nation of Cyprus. It's pretty closely affiliated with Greece. Think of it like the New Zealand to Australia. That's sort of what Cyprus is to Greece. And they're terrible at managing money. They were up to their eyeballs in debt, and they were asking the European Union, hey, you got to bail us out. And Germany at the time was at the very upper echelons of the European Union. It was sort of their call. Are you going to give a whole butt ton of money to this little island nation that can't get its in order when it comes to finances? And Germany said, okay, we will give you, Cyprus, several $billions to bail you out, but you're also going to have to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. What you're going to have to do is raid the bank accounts of all of the citizens in your country. Now, Cyprus is a little bit unusual because a lot of the bank accounts that exist in Cyprus are not people who are living in Cyprus. They're a bunch of Russians who took money offshores. But for our purposes today, the instruction was go into all of the bank accounts that exist in the country. And if they're not insured, meaning that they're in excess of the insurable amount, like in this country, if you have money in a bank and the bank gets robbed, the FDIC will insure you up to $250,000. Now, if you got $300,000 in the bank account, you're only going to get 250 back. You're still going to be out 50 grand. Now, at the time in Cyprus, the deal was everything that is not insured is available for grabs. So, over a holiday weekend, like the one we just had, a 3-day weekend, the Cyprus government froze all the banks, went into the accounts and said, hey, what do we got here? And I went to some AI just to get the raw numbers on it for your own edification. Two big banks, really, that you need to think about. 47.5%, as they called it, haircut. They took almost half the money that were in the bank accounts that were in excess of about like $129,000, $130,000. They do euros over there, but that's sort of what it was. Everything in excess of $129,000, half of it was seized out of this one giant bank. The other one, 80%. In effect, what wound up happening was 55%, over half of all the money in the banks, even the insured amount, if you just pooled it all together, 55% of everything that was in the banks in Cyprus just went into the possession of the government. Now, try to put yourself into that situation. You think there might be some rioting in the United States of America if, say, over a Memorial Day weekend, our government said, hey, we're kind of hard up here. We owe like $40 trillion. So this is what we're going to do. Over the holiday weekend, when you're not able to go to your bank, we don't want you to have a run on the bank where you go in there and pull out your money because you don't want the sweet government to come in and take all of that. No. It's inaccessible to you. The benevolent, magnanimous government is going to go in and take like half of the money that you've been able to deposit. I think we would have some riots in this country. I think there would be violence. Things would be burned. It would be really, really ugly. Now, matter of perspective time. Cyprus did that over a weekend. What is the functional difference between doing that over a weekend and what the government has done to you since 2013 when this happened and today? Just the time, right? It's been 13 years rather than 3 days. But when you factor in inflation, the United States inflation is right around 40%. since 2013. So let's compare ourselves to Cyprus. The overall effect in Cyprus from going in and taking all of that money, 55% of all the bank deposits that were in there, they wound up draining a quarter of the wealth in the country, 25%. 25% because some of the money was insured and some of it couldn't be touched. And 25% of everything in Cyprus was taken from the banks. We are out 40%. And yet, we don't have riots. We don't have things burning down because the matter of perspective was completely changed. Well, it's an inflation. It's a healthy economy. You want to show growth, 2%, right? That's what we're targeting. Meanwhile, you're getting poorer and poorer and poorer every single day because we have this economic phenomenon called inflation, in which the government prints money out of thin air until the dollars in your bank account become worth less and worth less and worth less until they become worthless. And you are actually poorer today than if you've just had your money seized 13 years ago in Cyprus. It's all a matter of perspective. It's a matter of perspective, actually, that the Atlantic is having a difficult time understanding. So the Atlantic is actually the first place I want to go to today. Hard left, actually, the author of this piece, her name is Annie Lowry. She argues in a book that we need to have a universal basic income. So you know where she comes from. All things good come from the government. But she weighs in on the vibe session, as she refers it to. The headline of the piece is "The vibe session is over, the permacession is here." And this is an analysis of a recent poll that was conducted. So this month, University of Michigan Index of Consumer Sentiment dropped to its lowest point since 1952. What does that mean? People are really down on the economy. It's the lowest it's been in over 70 years. Now, bear in mind, it is lower than it was during the Jimmy Carter days when they were rationing gas and the price of groceries basically doubled during that administration. It is worse than it was when Paul Volcker came in and raised the interest rates to like 18% in order to buy a house in the 1980s and we had a recession. It is worse than the Great Recession, when the global economy essentially collapsed because we built up this gigantic house of cards through real estate, where banks were giving loans to people to buy houses when they didn't have a job or an asset to their name, and yet you get a house and you get a house. And you know what sounds awesome? Let's take their ability to pay that and make it something that others can invest in so we can collapse the entire economy. And the stock market collapsed by 50% basically overnight. And 6 million homes were foreclosed on. It's worse than it was 6 years ago during coronavirus, when the government told you to stay home and stay safe and shut down your non-essential business that you use to feed your family and pay your mortgage. And all of those businesses never came back. It is worse today. Now, here in the Atlantic, Annie Lowry, she argues like this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So her evidence for how things are actually fairly good. 96 out of every 100 Americans who want a job have one. Tight labor market has fueled wage gains because there's not a lot of circulation in the professional sector, where people are moving from one job to another. Everybody's kind of like in this static role. But as a result of that, wages have gone up. The American middle class is richer than the middle class of every major European economy. And she points out that if France and England were states in the United States, they would be the two poorest states. That's how good things are in the United States. Now, that sounds a lot like the way that the Joe Biden AutoPen administration tried to message things. They told us things have never been better. Coming out of this global pandemic, we're doing amazing. The rest of the world is really struggling. We are the skinniest kid at fat camp. We're the smartest retard. We're the tallest midget. Because what Annie Lowry just can't seem to put her finger on, because she just doesn't have the perspective on it, is that, yeah, we might be better than other countries, but things still aren't really humming along. Now, she tries to come up with a couple of different ideas of what this could actually be. Why do people feel so terrible? And she says, well, cost of living has gone up, childcare, healthcare, college, elder care. Those expenses are going up faster than the overall price of inflation. And then there's a whole thing with there's a housing shortage. And people are kind of stuck in a house that they want to get out of. They're stuck in a neighborhood that they don't want to live in. But really, what it comes down to, and I think she kind of like accidentally comes upon this, millions of people are putting off things like getting married, purchasing a home, having a child, starting a business, switching a career. And that's all thanks to the cost of living. That's thanks to the housing prices. And all of those expenses that we're incurring every single day are the fault of this thing called inflation, because there's too much month at the end of the money. I know we're really killing it compared to France, but have you gone to a grocery store? Do you do the shopping? Do you realize just how much it costs to feed you and your family? Look, we might be earning more money than we ever have, but we're earning more dollars that are basically toilet paper at this point. And comparing us to other countries that are doing not as well isn't really the salve on the wound that she thinks it is, because we've lost a lot of institutional trust. 40%? I mean, the case that I just made to you, comparing us to Cyprus, we're 40% poorer than we were in 2013, when that government took 25% of the money that was in the bank accounts. They're actually doing better than us today. You just rule out everything that they've done since then. If they just frozen themselves, they would have economically been doing better than us today. And it's at the feet of a government that cannot focus on its prime directives. It just absolutely refuses to. It's supposed to promote the general welfare. That's not Obama phones. That's not childcare. That's not health care. That's not welfare. That is setting up a system in which individuals can thrive and we can pursue our happiness, where we can have our lives and our liberty, and that's just about it. Do the very finite amount of responsibilities that the American people demand as part of our social compact, of our contract with the government, where we do give up some liberty and we expect and demand that the government can deliver on protection against fraud and force and protect the border. And that's about it. But instead, what's going on from our government is things that are not American first, not focusing on the pesky, dusty documents, not focusing on the social compact, on those finite amount of responsibilities, those duties that the government owes you, the citizen. Instead, Americans are get to the back of the line. So this is from Real Clear Investigations. Headline: The Replacements, How U.S. Helps Foreign Workers Take American Jobs. In the last few decades, the California dream has gone global as U.S. tech firms have filled their ranks with and C-suites with employees born abroad. So what Real Clear Investigation did was they dug really heavily into big tech and the H-1B visas. So all told, 2/3 of Silicon Valley's 400,000 tech jobs are now held by foreigners. If you were to combine tech workers from India and China, they are now more than American workers in Silicon Valley. So while the H-1B program spans multiple industries, it's overwhelmingly concentrated on tech. Companies on average save $100,000 per year over 6 years by hiring a foreigner. And the numbers here, guys, are unbelievable. They're staggering. We're becoming increasingly tech focused. There's all this concern that AI is going to take all the jobs, and you're hearing about the data centers because everything is tech. I mean, shoot, when people were losing jobs a few years ago, what was the bang on them? What was the hit? Well, just go learn to code, you rube, the plebeian swine. Well, I guess learning to code, if you're an American, didn't help you out very much. So let's just rewind the clocks a little bit. Right around the time that Cyprus was seizing all that wealth, a couple of years later, 2015, the number of H-1B visas that were allowed into this country, 275,000. Last year, it was 406,000. So that's a pretty healthy increase over a 10-year period. Now, there's been some efforts afoot. There's conversations about how, look, we're going to protect American jobs. So here's an idea. $100,000 fee. That's what we're going to assess to these tech companies if they want to bring in somebody from India to do a job. You're going to have to pay the government $100,000 if you've, and that's going to artificially bring up the expense of hiring a foreigner. And that company might say, oh, yeah, I guess we're going to save $100,000 over 6 years, but it's really at the end of the day, it's not worth it. We're not planning on having that person here for 6 years. So we'll just hire an American. But there's workarounds for that. They're big tech firms, they're not full of idiots. So what are they doing? They're hiring foreign students who are on student visas to then just get the H-1B, and they don't have to pay the fee then. They avoid incurring that $100,000 fee. And look, this is indentured servitude for a lot of foreign born workers who come in here. They're accepting wages that are not as high as they would be for an American, and they're beholden to the company that has brought them over here. And that company can say, you do exactly what you were tell you to do when we tell you to do it. When we tell you to jump, you say how high. And if you don't, we're just going to send your butt back to India. So we've now created this underclass. And that doesn't seem very American. That doesn't seem like it has a lot of opportunity for somebody who brings a unique skill set and has expressed a willingness to fold into the melting pot. That sounds kind of gross. Foreign employees who are being hired by these tech firms, they're also prejudiced in favor of hiring other foreign workers. They're like, hey, look, I came from that hellhole. I know what it's all about. Why don't you come on, join me over here? I'll hire you, not one of these Americans who doesn't know how sweet they have it. And then the minimum wage proposal. This has been a government effort. Government saying, look, we got to protect Americans. We got to make sure that Americans can go to work here. So let's just set a law and demand that the big tech companies can bring in foreign workers. If they pay the fee, they also have to pay them the wage that an American would demand. Well, right away, the big tech companies are going to say, well, I guess we'll just have to hire American. Yeah, except the big tech companies have this thing called lobbyists, and they donate millions and millions of dollars to politicians who theoretically are responsible for you, the American people, their constituents. But you know, if Meta and Google and Twitter, they want to donate millions of dollars to a politician, well, their hands are tied. Then they got to take that and say, you know, we just can't get around to trying to bring up that wage that will be required for the foreign workers. And I guess folks from India, they're going to be prejudiced in the hiring process ahead of an American. They're just cheaper. So a matter of perspective. Do you feel like the American citizen is at the front of the line in the eyes of the government? No, no. Well, only the specials are. And I want to get to that in a second. But before we do, guys, I want to give you your one time per episode reminder. If you haven't already, make sure that you give us a nice thumbs up, follow, subscribe on YouTube, Rumble at AmRadPod, and also head on over to the Spotify channel. This is what it looks like. Throw it up on the screen. You can follow us there. Give us a play at some point this week, one of these episodes. It'll help us to trick that algorithm over in big tech to radicalizing more Americans. So come on over and join us on the American Radicals podcast. And I will also try to schedule the one commercial that I have for right about now. If Spotify wants to take us up on that, I'm available, guys. We're trying to monetize. We're trying to make this endeavor not a hobbyist, not an amateur endeavor, but actually a professional one. So if they want to insert an ad there, we'll be sure to do that. And I give you that heads up so you can jump forward and get back to what we're talking about today on this matter of perspective, where you, the American, should be front of mind. But as it currently stands, you're not. You're getting bilked because the United States government is stealing, I mean, taxing from you to redistribute your hard earned money to people who it deems to be more important, and actually not even doing that well, doing that to the extent of billions of dollars, which is going to result in more theft, I mean, taxation, and more printing of money, which will cause inflation, which will in effect be more theft from you because they can't even give out the welfare effectively. This is a report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Barf bags out, guys. This is sickening. The headline, Payment Integrity, Agencies Estimated Improper Payments Increased to $186 billion in fiscal year 2025. What does that mean? For fiscal year 2025, 15 different agencies that handled all that welfare, they overspent by $186 billion. This represented 24 billion more than they did the year before. So, the year before, they spent by $161 billion that they shouldn't have. And they went in the wrong direction. Instead of doing the Doge and saying, hey, why are we spending this to begin with? Or if we're going to have to be obliged to spend the money, can we at least send the correct amount? They're like, nope, hold my beer. We're going to do worse. So in last year alone, the United States government, when they were doling out Medicare and other welfare benefits, spent $186 billion that it shouldn't have. That's in excess of what it should have, in healthy air quotes, because it shouldn't be spending anything like that, because nothing in welfare is part of your pesky, dusty documents. But clearly, I'm outvoted on that one. But if you have to spend the money, if you've agreed to redistribute wealth in some sort of a socialist fashion in this country, we're going to have a robust welfare system. Can you at least just send the money that you're obligated to, and not $186 billion more than you should have? Nope. Our bad, guys. Sorry about that. Now, this included a couple of different ones in here. Agencies reported that 153 billion was the result of overpayments. Medicaid mistakes cost $37 billion. Food stamps, $10 billion. People are coming in to get SNAP benefits, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, food stamps from the government. And the government gave them $10 billion more than they should have. Oh, and by the way, that 186 total does not include the fraud that we hear about all the time coming out of places like Minneapolis from the Somalis that are coming in here, or California, because that's supposed to be even worse than it is in Minnesota. No, that's a separate category of money that's been stolen from you. This is just our bad. We were supposed to send $100 and we actually spent $200. Or in the case of the government, it was probably 1,000. They messed up the decimal point. Our bad. Sorry about that. This is what happens when the incentive structure is completely on its head. Because what is the government other than people spending other people's money on not themselves? The worst, most inefficient way of spending money. Milton Friedman has got into that. Now, the total, the 186 that we did last year. What's the total that we've had over like a respectable amount of time? I went back to 2003. 2003, 23 years, the total amount of overpayments, not just payments that they shouldn't be making to begin with, the overpayments, our bad, we messed up the decimal point. $3 trillion. What is $3 trillion? That's the total amount that Barack Obama spent in his first year in office. You remember the communist Barack Obama, the Barackalypse, right? Hope and change. Geez, I hope I have some change left in my pocket after he just spends us into oblivion. Barack Obama spent $3 trillion. That was the total in his first year in office. And everybody was out there throwing tea parties with the tri-corner hat saying, we got to get our fiscal house in order. The United States government over 23 years spent the exact same amount to fund the government during the first year of our openly communist president. Was just our bad, overpayments. Sorry about it. And when they do that, it creates living conditions that are ridiculous. So I want to go to a New York Times piece. And I'm trying again to wrap my head around this life. It's a matter of perspective. I live in the land of milk and honey where woke and winter go to die. That is Florida. So I don't really have an appreciation for the affordability in New York City. But this was written about and it blew my mind. So the headline here: Affording New York, how a family of four lives on $225,000 a year in Washington Heights. Guys, I'm a numbers guy. I'm a money guy. I'm a finance guy. I don't get how this is actually possible, but maybe you do. You can put it in to the comment section. Helen, or her name is Ellen. Her name is Ellen Hagen. She's from Kentucky. She moved to New York. She winds up marrying her husband, and they have two daughters. That's the background. Ellen and her husband have been in New York for 25 years. The couple both work at DreamYard, a Bronx arts nonprofit. So they're both professionally useless people, and professionally useless people living in New York City earning $178,000. They also do some side hustles. They typically bring in another $40,000 to $60,000 doing some freelance work and some adjunct professorships. So basically, all of that money adds up to $225,000. Two kids, age 12 and 15. They have a house with a mortgage. They've been paying on the mortgage for 16 years. Obviously, not paying more on the mortgage than they should have because their mortgage was only $285,000 living in New York and they still owe on it. But what are their expenses? Earning $225,000. Amrads, let's see if you could live on this. Well, mortgage is $1,300 a month. The girls that they have attend public school with free activities, and they also like kind of play the system a little bit. They're involved in these other free enrollments or like pay what you can sort of things. Their kids are into the arts. They're basically for free. So where are their expenses? Well, they give their kids about $5,000 a year in allowance, but they're earning close to a quarter million. That's not huge. Sometimes the husband and wife they work together. They actually published a novel and got an advance of 35,000. Heck, guys, I got a $25,000 advance offered to me. I turned it down because I worked for the FBI and I couldn't take it. They got a $35,000 advance to write their novel, which is called "Tell Me Every Lie." Sorry, I'm a reader. That one, though, avoided my attention. But they're a bunch of people who do professionally useless jobs in New York City. I imagine it's some communist propaganda. Where's the money going out? Because here, the way that the New York Times characterized it, I wanted to make enough money to live on in New York existence that I was dreaming for, but they're feeling anxious about the money that they had hoped they would have at this point in their lives. So they're spending some money on allowance. They got money going towards a mortgage. Where's the leak in this boat? I don't know. They're going on vacation up to the Jersey Shore for like 3 grand. They own a property in Kentucky jointly with their parents that they have to pay out for there. And they spend $700 a month on food in New York City. I live in Florida, $700. I think we spend that every other week. I've got two growing boys. So where's the leak? From the total amount that I was able to calculate for a family in New York City earning $225,000 a year, they have like 50 grand going out the door, which means that 175 is blow me money? Just blow money. No, it's not because they live in New York City and they owe exorbitant levels of taxes and they have to fund their lives there on the transit systems and all of the expenses that are attached here for this family. They are anxious. I mean, we're back to that story from the Atlantic. Like, things have theoretically never been better, and yet people who live in New York City earning almost a $250,000 a year, who live a pretty frugal conservative life from what I can tell, are not comfortable. Why would they have that sense? Well, maybe because over the last 25 years, heck, let's just cut it in half. Over the last 13 years, they've had 40% of their money stolen by their government. Now, look, they live in New York City. They're probably communists. They're having more stolen than you if you live like me in Florida, because I live in a tax-free state. But we're all experiencing 40% theft at the hands of a government that just can't keep focused on the very few things that it wants. And it has inflated the amount of money into their system to such an extent that this family feels the squeeze, earning $250,000, living relatively conservatively. All right. So we covered a whole bunch of stuff on finances and money and nerded out on that. That kind of makes people's eyes glaze over. I want to do a completely unrelated story today, but I think it sort of keeps with the matter of perspective on framing the way that we view things. And this is way more in my lane here on the AMRAD pod because it deals with national security and an over intrusive government and defining what it is to be a terrorist, or in this case, to provide material support to terrorism. So this comes from courtwatch.news, and it is pretty big, guys. I imagine this will probably find itself in front of the Supreme Court for the time being. Headline: When terrorism isn't terrorism anymore. And this is all about providing material support to terrorism. This is the career case. If you happen to work in the FBI, if you can entrap some retard into agreeing to do their worst ideas after all the grooming you give them from the undercovers and the confidential human sources, you charge them with providing material support to terrorism. 18 United States Code 2339 Bravo. It prohibits someone from knowingly attempting or providing material support or resources in terms of funds, training, expertise, labor, or any other kind of commodity that has monetary value to a foreign terrorist organization. But here's the key portion, guys. According to the statute, for a person to attempt to provide labor or, quote, personnel to a terrorist organization, they must have been under the direction or control of the group. So, what's the background for this ruling? You're bad guy here. You're terrorist here. He was arrested in 2017, I think is when it happened. His name is Akaid Ullah. Durga. We'll just call him John Doe. So John, he was radicalized by ISIS. He was watching a whole bunch of propaganda videos, and then he decides he wants to set off an S-vest. So he does. He collects a bunch of nails and wirings and sugar and a battery. He straps on an S-vest, and he walks in to where was it? A train station in New York City. So he goes into a train station, New York City, 2017, detonates the S-Fest, and he's a really crummy terrorist. Doesn't kill anybody. He injures a few people, mostly hearing damage. It's kind of just like a really loud boom, but not a murderous boom. He doesn't even kill himself. So the government comes in, swoops in. We have an actual act of terrorism. We're going to arrest him and we're going to interrogate him. And what does John tell them? He says, I did it because of the Islamic State. All right, we got a confession. So he gets charged with a whole bunch of charges to include providing material support to ISIS. Okay, here's the problem. He is not in communication with ISIS. He basically just watched their online propaganda and said, I'm down for the fight. I want to be a martyr on behalf of ISIS. And the government argued that him saying that I want to be a martyr was providing material support to a terrorist organization. So charges get brought. And look, this guy set off an S-Fest. I'm sure the jury in New York was very happy to send him to prison for the rest of his life for whatever the government said it was. He gets convicted on all counts and he goes to the pokey for life. But that's when his legal team goes to work and says, hey, look, one of these charges, providing material support, does that sound like he was giving materiel because he gave his own body? He wasn't even in conversations with ISIS. Heck, I mean, he hadn't even been entrapped by the government yet. How does that stand to reason? So they bring an appeal to the appeals court. So the appeals court, they take this up for 4 years. Why would it take 4 years? Because this is a big deal, guys. This is a massive deal. I've even had the intellectual conversation with you on the American Radicals podcast before. Providing material support to terrorism. I'm here talking to you, right? Exercising my First Amendment. ISIS would pay a pretty penny, as small as I am. ISIS would pay to have me argue their ideology on this program in front of the people who consume the content here on YouTube and Rumble and Spotify and across all the different platforms that this streams on. ISIS would pay for that. So if I was just exercising my opinion and I said, hey, I think those guys are up to something that's really good. Theoretical FBI, don't come bashing in my door. But in this theoretical world, if I did that, that could be construed as material support if we understand providing material support the way that the government has argued it. But in this case, this guy wasn't in touch with anybody from the foreign terrorist organization. He just became radicalized by their content. And the question became, did providing himself, was that personnel to ISIS? The appellate court took 4 years because this is a big deal. They even had one of the judges die in this time. They had to replace it. And ultimately, they came down a 2-1 decision and they said, no, it's not. Here's the quote from the judge who issued the decision. I will read it off here. Quote, as a matter of ordinary meaning, a person cannot work under ISIS's direction or control if he is acting alone. And if ISIS does not know he exists, has no expectations he will hear ISIS's message or act on them, and will not know or care or have any recourse if he ignores the message completely. So as a result, the appellate court said here, material support to terrorism, you actually have to provide material. So I think that's an objectively good thing. And this guy's been charged with 4 other crimes. And the way that it's characterized here in this court watch, like they're kind of upset about it. They want him in jail for all reasons. But I think that that's actually an objectively good decision. He's in prison for the rest of his life for the actual crimes that he committed. Providing material support was not one of them. And this is a good precedent to set. Because otherwise, we open this Pandora's box and we can construe somebody on a podcast. And we've talked about how we're reorienting the national security space right now. And you got Seb Gorka out there saying that, well, Tucker Carlson, he's saying things that we don't agree with. That'll be construed as providing material support to terrorism because Tucker Carlson has a far bigger platform than I have here. But, hope springs eternal. So you never know one day. I would like this precedent to be in place because I am against the way that the national security mission has been reoriented because it's all a matter of perspective, guys. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter is the famous saying. But are you speaking out against the government? Are you saying that it's a problem for us to have 40% inflation over the last 13 years? Ooh. The day might come that might make you an anti-government extremist who's providing material support to some militia group that you have never interfaced with. It's a slippery slope argument. Make it all the time. Let's take the teeth out of this attack dog on anything related to national security because we live in a land that is blessed. The threat is not there. The threat, ultimately, the far greater threat, is an ever-encroaching government that is interested in expanding its mission set so it can go after American citizens who it deems to be engaged in wrongthink, or just expand itself bureaucratically and do so at the expense of the Americans to the point where people earning $250,000 are feeling the squeeze and they're not living extravagantly. Okay. So that's the end of the American Radicals podcast for today on this Wednesday, guys. But I got a fun palate cleanse today, a matter of perspective, I guess. I can try to see if I can weave this into the theme of the day. How about it's all a matter of perspective? Are you getting what you should in a very efficient manner if you order some pool noodles from Walmart? I don't think you are. They're sending 1 pool noodle per box.
So Walmart sent me 1 noodle in each box. Every one of those is 1 noodle. That's the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. Bro, like, what are my neighbors gonna think, Look, we're halfway unloaded. This is insane. And poor Ian, he just happened to be here. Look at him. Why?
How much was shipping?
It was free. But how stupid is that? Shipping's free, but you wasted all these boxes, this guy's time, all the fuel, and you sent me, how many boxes are in here, bro?
165.
165 boxes. Just pull it out, open it. Yeah, there you go. Look at that. Why? What is the point of that?
I don't know what the point of that is, but whoever is running that shipping department, they might be on the unemployment line. They might be one of those 4% who needs a job soon. All right, guys. Plan to be back with you tomorrow on the American Radicals podcast. And until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.